banking.
Query string.
Chat. Spam.
Together is to answer a couple of questions. The first question is, what happens actually when we run a... So here on the left, we have a binary, and are not magic.
Actually...
necessarily magical happening here. It's really... So don't give up.
Or can explain it very well.
Before we begin, I'd like to talk through the Rust compilation model. And this is vastly simplified and in some ways not even fully correct, but it's important for this talk that we kind of understand how Rust compiles code. So you have some code. Here's a main function printing a wave emoji here.
Smart.
And we're going to pass that Rust code over to Rust C and LLVM. And of course, most Rust users usually use Cargo.
Oh my God.
Hopefully everybody here knows that Cargo is the build tool, and ultimately what Cargo does is call Rust C, the Rust compiler. And Rust C is a front end that can interpret, parse, and understand Rust code. And LLVM is the back end that Rust C plugs into that takes Rust C's understanding of your code and turns it into machine code. But what it does, what LLVM ultimately produces, is object files. And these are kind of groups of functions, metadata, optimizes for size instead of linker it needs to run with. And if we run readelf and look at the .interp section, which is what -x.interp does for us, then it will show us here that it needs this /lib64/ld linux x8664.so.2 dependency. And if you remember back to LDD before, this is exactly the third dependency that we talked about that our binary has. So it was the kernel that put some of our executable into memory, and then it looked inside of our binary and said, oh, this thing needs a dynamic loader. Which one does it need? Oh, it needs that one. I'll load that one for it, and then I'll hand it off to the dynamic loader, and I'm out. So really, the kernel has a pretty simple job when it comes to things, and it hands off to the dynamic loader to do the really heavy lifts to go, because this was really just an introduction. The first one I'll talk about is MacGobble's The Bits Between the Bits, which is kind of what got me into this stuff. This is a CPPCon talk that talks about how to get...
of course, Rust talk talks about C++. Of course, every fucking Rust talk always talk about the superior language C++.
To main for a C++ executable. And that talk goes even deeper than I was able to go in today. So take a look at that one. Then, of course, faster than lines, making your own executable packer is probably kind of the best, I would say, Rust-specific introduction or really guide to learning about this stuff. You essentially create your own dynamic loader from scratch, which is really cool. Patrick Horgan's How the Heck Do We Get to Main is really great, and gave me a lot of this information. If you're into Windows, James McNellis's Everything You Ever Wanted to Know About DLLs is really fantastic. So you can kind of essentially learn the same thing, but from a Windows perspective. And then John Thagen's Minimizing Rust Binary Size is a great resource if you want to make the smallest possible Rust binary so that all of this is a little bit easier to work with. All right. And that's it. That's my talk. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
You got 2 seconds to